Now I'd like to bring in Shravan Nagesh.
Thanks, Patricia. So with the holy month of Ramadan underway, a time of fasting, prayers and coming together for the Muslim community, is this the appropriate time, as mentioned by Mr. Albanese, and possibly the best opportunity for the government to resume funding for the UNRWA?
Yes, so UNRWA, that's the aid agency for Palestinians. Ed Husic, I might start with you there.
Well, the biggest thing that needs to be front and centre here is that children over there are starving in Gaza. People are without food, water, medicine, and there is a concern of a further loss of life as a result of Israel's military operations in Gaza. We've had that suspension of funding. We are working hard and we do need to see funding resumed as quickly as possible. UNRWA doesn't just supply humanitarian aid, it's responsible for the functioning of community in Gaza. And, there are decisions being made, either suspending help to Gaza, seeing Israel's military operations there and the impact that's had on lives lost, estimated 31,000 plus and nearly 73,000 injured. We do need to get this restored as quickly as possible.
And you want it restored to UNRWA?
Well, we've got to go through the investigations and see what they say, but that needs to happen as quickly as possible.
Because the government's looking at other options. There's a push just this afternoon, I'm sure you've seen the stories, some people saying, some of the Israeli lobby groups, that they would like to see the money go towards the floating aid base, the pier that they've described, the US. Would that be appropriate?
I think the best thing that could happen right now is that Israel actually allows humanitarian aid to go through. That's the thing that's not being discussed adequately. They need to let this happen.
But why aren't they?
There is an unprecedented crisis that is happening there, and there are decisions, life and death decisions, that are being made by Israel that need to be dealt with, and there needs to be more humanitarian aid going through. And it's not just while we're focused on Gaza, there's also in the West Bank. People are being prevented in terms of their jobs, their incomes. They're economically being crippled in that part as well. That hasn't even been contemplated yet, where people are begging for cash and heating through the course of winter. And I think that's another issue as well that has been missed and needs to be recognised and dealt with.
So you think the responsibility is on Israel?
Yeah, in terms of humanitarian aid, absolutely. And much of the international community has been saying this needs to be addressed, that innocent civilians should not be paying the price and they should be able to get the aid flowing through a lot quicker. And the fact that the US has had to get to that stage of talking about that floating pier demonstrates that I think in many respects Israel has refused to listen to what I believe are absolutely not just reasonable but vital calls for people to get the aid that they need.
So if Israel's not listening, should they face sanctions and ramifications?
Well, I think you're going to see that enter. You'll see that enter into the public debate increasingly.
Do you think that we need to start having that conversation?
It's not up to me to be floating, those type of discussions. But the point for me is to say certainly that we need to see Israel take a different position when it comes to the flow of humanitarian aid. There are at least 7 different points at which that aid could come through, not least of which being through Rafah, and that needs to be improved.
Yanis, the Australian government has changed its line significantly in the last few months as the death toll has risen, signing a joint agreement with New Zealand and Canada, for instance, calling on Israel not to enter into a ground offensive in Rafah. There's been a big shift, hasn't there, in the world's response?
No. Too little, too late.
Yep.
The starving children in Gaza are not starving. They are starved intentionally. There is a concerted effort by Israel to starve the population of Gaza. This is not collateral damage. This is an intentional policy. It is a war crime.
They would argue that the reason the aid's not going in is because Hamas takes the aid, and that's the argument they make. What's your response to that?
That it is evidently not true. that there is a policy. All you need to do is to listen to Israeli television, to listen to Israeli ministers, being very clear that they are not letting aid in as a means of starving the population to submission until Hamas lays down their arms, half of the population leave and go to Egypt. By denying this funding to the United Nations, the only aid agency that can actually bring aid into Gaza, because you can bring it to the shores of Gaza, but how is it going to be distributed? The only agency is that. And defunding it, which is what your government did, on the basis of unsubstantiated...
They paused the funding.
Well, that's the funding. Yeah? When you have kids starving to death, and you pause, you are defunding the amelioration of the starvation of those children. And therefore, in my view, the image of Australia has been irreparably damaged by this. And now beginning to fund again an organization which can't bring the food in because the Israeli Defense Force is not letting them bring it in. It's not that they're not even letting the Americans bring it in. This is the time for boycotting, sanctioning and divesting from Israel. And we need to do it on behalf of progressive Israelis who are suffocating in Israel as we speak, because they can see that the whole world is looking upon Israel as the source of war crimes. We need to make sure that Israeli progressives and humanists do not continue to flee, because they're leaving the country, and they will surrender the country to the zealots and the ultra-Zionists who will make Israel uninhabitable.
Jacqui Lambie, at the start of this crisis, you gave a powerful speech at the Parliament. You were very concerned about the Hamas attack, as a lot of people have been and should be. 5 months into this conflict, what are your reflections? Do you think Israel's gone too far?
I think Israel is starting to annoy a lot of people out there. They're sitting right on the line. They're about to go over it if they don't do something.
You don't think they've crossed it yet?
I will just say they're right on that line. I think this has been going on for too long. The problem is you do have terrorists, and terrorists are bastards. There's no other way to put that. Anywhere that has terrorists, you will have destabilisation through your country. There is no doubt about that when you have a large group of them. That's my first thing. My second point is this. We have a thing out there, it's called United Nations. OK, we have soldiers out there that wear blue caps. Now, I'd like to see Israel take out one of them when they're on the ground passing out food. Why aren't we talking about putting peacekeepers over there at these checkpoints, neutral countries that are not involved, OK, to make sure this food is getting delivered? Why aren't we doing that? Nobody's talking about this, and I don't see a reason why not. They haven't got months and months, those kids over there, all the adults or anyone on that Gaza Strip. It needs to be done tomorrow. I would like to see United Nations talking about bringing those blue hats in there on that Gaza Strip, because I'd like to see bloody Israel try and take one of them out, OK?
Joe Biden will veto it again, as he's vetoed every move towards a humanitarian direction since the beginning. It's the United States vetoing and dragging the rest of the West along with them.
Well, the rest of the West needs to stand on its own 2 feet.
Yeah. Is that a viable option?
The one that's been proposed? I mean, this is sort of beyond the scope of my area of expertise, but it certainly seems like a viable option. This is an absolute humanitarian disaster. Yeah. Every day that passes is another day of lost lives, and I mean, there's no doubt but that there is an urgent need to act on this, to bring this to an end.